We are just now getting started. It's 8 o'clock. Happy Cinco de Mayo. I am dressed appropriately for the holiday. I also have my handy dandy margarita. So I hope you guys aren't missing out on anything super exciting. You can always have tacos on Taco Tuesday. So without further ado, I am going to introduce my very good friend, Nick Turner from SureFit. You've probably seen his face out on the road. He's usually at the trade show booth for SureFit, and they do a lot of shows. They are a distributor. They carry lots of different products, and we highlight a bunch of their products throughout the year. Right now, we're talking about X-rays. So I know there's a lot of technology out there with X-rays, and he's going to talk to us about all the latest and greatest. So without further ado, I said that for the second time. Nick, you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. And I guarantee you now, without fail, I'm going to say without further ado at least two more times. So apologies in advance to
It's a
everyone
good
for
phrase.
overuse of without further ado. So thank you, as always, Ian, for having us, and muchas gracias for all of you who have chosen to share part of your Cinco de Mayo with us talking X-rays this evening. Uh, Unlike Ian, I'm definitely a margarita short of a party tonight, so I promise I will keep this webinar informative, direct, concise, and I will try to answer as many questions as I can while we're on here, and certainly can answer them afterwards if you have photos you want to share, if you have things you want to figure out with your X-ray system later, please, I'll make sure my contact is up there. Do not hesitate to ask. So while I did just promise you that this webinar will not be an infomercial, before you call me loco, I do have to give the obligatory 2-minute spiel of who am I, who is SureFit, and why should you care or listen to me. So let me jump into that so we can get to something a little more interesting here quicker. So as Ann mentioned, please, throughout this webinar, don't hesitate to throw questions in the Q&A. I'll encourage Ann to give me some breathers and to ask questions. I'll also look at all the questions at the end. There's no such thing as a dumb question. I know that whenever I say that, we sometimes push the limits then of that, but seriously, this is a safe space. I won't call your name out. You can ask questions and get feedback here. So for background, for those who don't know, SureFit's actually part of the Hanger portfolio of companies. If you've heard the name Hanger, and I'd be shocked if you hadn't, you likely know us for our patient care side, which operates over 1,000 O&P practices nationwide. And you likely have a Hanger clinic down the road from you, and you may or may not love them. That's completely understandable, based off, who you have for O&P referrals in your area. What you likely don't know, though, is that Hanger actually has an enormous products and services division, of which SureFit is a part of. SureFit's not the only company, though, you might have heard of. SureStep, who does a lot of pediatric AFOs and bracing, Phil Hour, and we have a number of other O&P brands that cross over into the podiatry and orthopedic universe. So while many people know SureFit as a diabetic shoe and insert provider, one of the benefits of being part of this big umbrella is we get to utilize their enormous supply chain and their massive purchasing power to provide a wide variety of other services, including DME, custom and non-custom bracing, and for the purposes of tonight, diagnostic equipment. So Ann kind of alluded to this earlier, but I've been around podiatry a while. I like to joke I once was skinny, and then I went to a bunch of trade shows and ate the wonderful food that's there in the hall, and now I look like this. But having been in this world for 15 years and having done digital X-rays pretty much throughout that time, I've seen a lot of developments and changes over the course of the past, 2 decades going on. Many of you, probably remember CR technology. Before CR technology, there were dark rooms. Some of you on this call might still be using a dark room. I promise not to shame you, but we will talk about that as well as CR technology. I remember when ScanX seemed like the coolest thing to come out. For background, I would say I have experience with everything from TigerView to 2020, A2D2 systems, Rayons, All Pro, Excel, and just about every other brand in between. Just because if you've been around long enough, you kind of see it all. Prior to coming over as director at SureFit, just for background, I previously co-founded a company called DocShop Pro and had started that really from the ground up, and it built it into a large supplier in the space that many of you might have used or heard of. And after leaving DocShop Pro, I went on to help manage over 80 podiatry practices throughout the US, where as one of my many roles and many hats, I oversaw the X-ray upgrades and repairs at the site level. I'll talk more about this experience because I got to experience firsthand how greasy some salespeople can be. And I also got to experience firsthand both sides of the practice vendor relationship and how X-rays can seem overwhelming, but also get unnecessarily complicated really fast because people give you a lot of bad information. So really my goal tonight is to give you simple information and to help you understand your options, understand what the market is moving towards, and understand if upgrading your X-ray makes sense, whether it's now, 6 months, or in a year. So let's talk about our Cinco reasons you may need an X-ray upgrade. Without further ado, I should say. So the number one reason, and it's not necessarily my number one reason in that, as I will get to, cost and space tend to be the number one thing people are concerned with. But the number one reason I would encourage you to think about what you have in your office is patient expectations. From a practical standpoint, with both consumer experience and practice management methods in mind, patients want answers when they walk in your door. Ann interfaces both with the marketing with vendors and with podiatrists all the time, but also with patients. Patients do not like when they have to be sent out for imaging and reappointed later to get those answers. We live in the instant gratification age today. So whether it's Amazon delivering to your house in 2 hours, and without a doubt, Amazon will probably drop something off here by the end of this call, and you might hear my dogs bark in the background, or Uber, which has completely replaced the need for taxi lines and all of the other fun experience of taxis. These are just two. Netflix. All of these concepts permeate into healthcare, whether you like that or not. From a protocol standpoint, though, from a patient education or from a patient expectation side, your patients expect to get imaging in 2025. If their foot or ankle hurts and you are not doing imaging, for the most part, many of them are going to question that. They may not say it to your face, they may not volunteer that out loud, but in today's age, to skip imaging and to rule out or just to have all of the information when it's readily available, that's going to be a red flag. So I often tell practices that I've managed, and since being back on the other side here in the vendor world, that each office should have a protocol for what are the conditions that come in that trigger an X-ray every time. So and the reason that's important is it creates continuity of care. It reduces your liability, which we'll talk about more in a few slides. It improves outcomes, and understandably, it actually creates a pretty reasonable financial return on investment. So likely you attend some of these podiatrymeetings.com's webinars because you realize that private practice is not Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders is an unbelievable cause. It is funded through unbelievable amounts of charity as well as physician charity in terms of time. But your practice is a business that needs to keep the lights on, and it is part of your obligation to provide great outcomes. You need to have a standard of care, and that standard of care also has to keep your financials in a place where you can continue to see patients. There's nothing immoral about that last statement, which is that patients expect instant gratification and you expect to provide a service that you're going to get compensated for. The top two reasons, and I mentioned this before, that I hear people tell me that they refer out x-rays are either cost driven or space driven. And cost might be because it's a new practice or it's a practice that, you're not sure how much longer you want to be open. We'll talk about those options. Space is often one that's confined. That's a very real one, and we'll talk about options there. But these two reasons, when you have a patient watching you go back to develop film in a dark room and you're firing up a light box in the patient room like it's 1995, it's going to cause concerns for your patients. And what it's really going to do, whether they express it or don't express it, is they're going to start questioning when you refer custom orthotics or a custom AFO, or you tell them that they really need to go for surgery. You are greatly amplifying the chances that they're going to go to somebody else in your market who has imaging to get a second or a third opinion. Because without doing imaging, there's a trust level there that drops. And even if you're referring that imaging out, the inconvenience for them is real. So let's jump into the second reason. And if we got any reactions, who here has an old Excel x-ray or something similar to it that looks like this? Anybody? Okay, not going to have any takers today, but that's okay. What I would say is the beauty of these old x-rays is that when they are maintained and showed a little bit of tender love and care, they can last for 30 plus years. The useful life and the return on investment horizon for these units is honestly greater than that of most cars on the road. It's probably greater than that of most of our houses. The only thing in your office that might be older are your podiatry chairs, which is a whole separate topic of at some point when you have chairs from the 70s and 80s. It's a style statement, but it might be time to upgrade those as well. But having said that, the great news is these x-rays can last for decades. We used to, our baseline for Excels was always, is it 1989 or younger or 1989 or older? Well, it's 2025. That means is your Excel 36 years or older. I come across offices using these all the time because they work, they're reliable, they're paid off, which is important. But having said that, I like to refer to this as Old Lassie or Old Yeller here. If Old Yeller is what your x-ray system here looks like, I would highly advise you to pay attention to the next two slides. So you're going to ask me, why is Old Yeller a liability? Well, the first, and it seems obvious, but some people are sometimes a little stubborn to admit it, is that the arms and heads on these units, if they break, they can cause serious damage to both patients and staff. And a lot of times I'll hear the comment of, well, I've given it tender love and care and it doesn't break. But I can't tell you how many times where I follow that question up with, is anything off with it? Do you have to handle it a certain way? And a lot of times the doctor might say no, but the staffer who's doing the x-rays immediately goes, oh yeah, you have to hold it with two hands and set it just so, or else it flies or it drops. So it is I would say a legal liability in that regard. But what's also a liability about these units is right here. It's this base. Back when they made these, it was pre any sort of digital output. These bases are incredibly high. They're oftentimes 6 to 8 inches. I would like to think I could still jump and step that height, but we've all seen Mr. and Mrs. Jones who struggle to lift their feet. They shuffle their feet into the x-ray room and they struggle to get up on these. And especially these older units with just a single side attachment, if this piece isn't mounted off on the wall, they really struggle to get up and then they struggle to turn around on these. So I'm going to speak more to that and why that's a very real thing. Getting back to the financials on these units, though, my third item I'd ask you to consider here with Old Yeller is there are financial incentives, and I'll go more into them, with ADA tax credits as well as Section 179, or even if retirement is 5 years out, it is not cost prohibitive to get something that's going to make your staff and your patients' lives easier, reduce your liability as a practice, and also add a little value when you go to sell your practice. My final call out on Old Yeller and why it's a liability is a lot of times and you'll hear me say this about ScanXs too. I won't stone anybody here for Old Yeller. I see these all the time. I love them. And we can work with them is the good news. But every time you have to get that local repair guy out and do labor, think of that as a sunk cost. It is a sunk cost on a piece of equipment that you might be prolonging it months or possibly a year or so. But in the end, it's likely money that you won't really be able to recoup, in that you'd be better putting that money towards making that 30-year investment and getting the next x-ray that's going to probably outlast you being in the practice, but will set you up for your associate or whoever is going to take over the practice for you. So to that, I want to just show you what more modern Excel or like a pod scan looks like. And these are out in the market. You're going to notice two things right away. The bases are just so much lower. You can see it on both these. You'll see the handrails. And I'm going to talk about some of the features on these as well that just make it an easier decision and a safer decision from a liability standpoint to consider making that upgrade from Old Yeller. But I'm also going to talk through in another slide how you don't necessarily have to replace the x-ray head or the x-ray box. In some cases, we can oftentimes just replace the base, and we can still give you the same outcome without nearly as much of the cost. So as you're looking to get out of the dark age to this more modern system, the benefits on these units is that the steps are only about 3 inches to 3.5 inches. So the way the ADA tax credit works, and I have a link here, I can send it to any of you. I will also caveat this by saying I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I'm not a CPA. You should always talk to your CPA. Don't listen to me. Take what I've told you, but get an expert opinion on it. But having said that, having done this for years and worked with practices who do it, what's nice about the ADA tax credit is there's a maximum expenditure of $10,250 every year for ADA eligible purchases. And you can expense up to 50% of that total dollar amount as a tax credit against your earnings on the practice. That pretty much cuts your cost of getting a new Excel unit in half, because not shockingly, the cost on one of these units tends to be around the maximum expenditure allowable. So if you're not doing it, like if you're not putting a ramp into your office building or doing something else ADA, this is a very good way to economically take advantage of upgrading your base or upgrading your system, but doing it for a fraction of the cost when you factor in the tax credits. The second piece here I'm going to throw in is that with these newer units, if you go with a new unit, or if we're able to retrofit with a new base for you to the bidirectional, what's nice is when Mr. and Mrs. Jones step up on this platform and they can hold the handrails, these tilt heads can go either direction. So you can get, if it's a bilateral x-ray, you can get all 3 of your images for each foot without the patient having to spin around, without you having to reposition them. It cuts down on the time for your staff and it gets them back into the treatment room quicker. It also cuts down on the likelihood of Mr. and Mrs. Jones slipping, tripping, falling. And if you see a lot of patients who are wheelchair bound or have ambulatory concerns, this makes it a lot easier for them to get x-rays without it being a liability. Okay, so I told you I would keep this fairly concise, and I'm going to try to stick to that. We are on to numero trace here, which is like anything, the technology is just better. I mean, I give this analogy a lot that, like, if you think about, if you have one of these ScanXs, and these ScanXs were the height of awesome when they came out, excuse me, they were great. They were modern technology. It took us from the dark room to digital, but it's kind of like the first iPod. The first iPod was amazing. Getting rid of the Walkman or the CD player and having it digitized. But now we have the iPod and our iPhone 16. We don't need different devices. We don't need components. And overall, the image quality with modern cesium panels is significantly higher. What I would tell you is when you were buying one of these ScanXs when they first came out, these things alone used to be up to 30 grand. A cesium panel such as this now with a 5-year warranty, it isn't quite half the cost of what this started as, but it's not far off. And it typically, depending on your patient load, pays for itself within 1 to 2 years. And based on the protocols in your patient mix, you're going to not only have a much smoother workflow, quicker images, and so forth, you're going to get rid of the streaky lines, the replacing plates, all these parts, which a lot of times practices I talk to now, they're starting to struggle to sometimes find the replacements for ScanXs. They're ordering stuff on eBay, hoping it lasts for 12 months, but you're not really sure what you're getting. One of my big call outs, though, on the technology side of this, some of you might love this, some of you might hate it. But what I would say is if you've ever been into like a Fleet Feet store or, the Good Feet chain, there is a reason they have visual tools in there for patients, whether it's a gait mapping device or a pressure plate imaging system. They have those in every one of their stores. And the reason for that is it helps patients visualize their issues. When they visualize it, when they see it on a screen in front of them, it feels real to them. It's not just somebody telling them something. So when you can quickly, using the software, pull it up in any treatment room in your office on a monitor, show them their image, you can draw and do measurements with podiatry specific tools, and you can show them exactly what's wrong and where the cause is. You can even print it out, on a local computer if they want to take it home or burn it to a USB drive or a disk. This gives them a lot more confidence in what that treatment protocol is because they can visualize it and see it. And it's extremely easy and it doesn't add cost. I would say if you have digital, even if you have a ScanX, you want to have the ability to pull up your images in each office. It is, if you have a monitor and, most people are on EMRs today, so you likely have either a laptop you're carrying around or a computer in each room. To be able to flip up the X-ray image and show it to them there, it's going to absolutely change how you talk to your patients about their course of action. It's going to instill confidence in them and what you're recommending, and it's going to pay for itself remarkably quickly. Okay, only 2 more reasons here, and I'll get you guys to Q&A and back to Cinco de Mayo. The fourth reason I hear all the time, it's all about the dinero, so cost. I get it. You hear numbers thrown around with X-rays all the time. I've seen X-ray quotes for as much as 50 or 60 grand, and as low as maybe 10 or 12 grand, sometimes depending on parts, even less. I would tell you before you go down the path of looking on .med or eBay, I wouldn't. If for the amount of issues you're going to have, if you're going to do an X-ray upgrade, work with a partner who can help you get the right equipment. But buying it on a .med or an eBay is a recipe for, even if it seemed too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And it's going to show up broken or without drivers or software's incompatible. So as you are looking at ways to affordably upgrade, I mentioned the ability that we can retrofit your existing Excel, or if you have another unit similar, we can put a new base on there. We can potentially retrofit it for bidirectional. Another option we do a lot of times with our old Yellers is that people will do a plexiglass. It's an acrylic base that has slots, and we can set up handrails, but the patient steps right onto this ADA compliant acrylic base, and that you can slot in the panel on either side to take the images or underneath so the patient's not standing on it. That is a very cost-effective way to upgrade your old Yeller without breaking the bank. It also really, it will improve the patient experience. It'll look a little different than this pretty looking new setup, but a lot of the retrofits we do, if your control box is mounted away from the unit, aside from the head, which might be a little yellow, if we need to upgrade the arm, we can upgrade the arm, but the new base makes a big difference, and it's a fraction of the cost of getting an entire complete system. A lot of times as well, Excel will do trade-ins on old pieces. They do this because people resell old pieces online. They're broken. Offices get them, and then they call and yell at Excel as to why they won't work. So instead of dealing with that, they found it's cheaper for them to just buy back Excel parts or units. So they will do trade-in credits as part of the deal. And similarly, companies will do trade-in credits for those old ScanX units, which mainly actually are still used in the bomb detection market. Nothing to do with podiatry, but they still have a lot of use in the law enforcement field. So from a cost standpoint, what I would say is there are a lot of options. It's not one size fits all. You probably have heard the expression, treat the patient, not their wallet. This is one of those cases where if you work with a partner, they can give you multiple options with multiple suppliers and customize 1 to 3 different scenarios for you, and you can determine what makes the most sense for you. But I would be careful. Back to my comment earlier from when I was running practices, there are a lot of sleazy sales reps who will try to bilk more money from you. So my last takeaway on this slide, and it's an important one because it might apply to some of you. I cannot tell you how many of our markets where we found that our offices had service contracts with a local x-ray company. So the x-ray company sold them the x-ray and the system, and it included a worry-free service and loaner program for 5 years that they charged in annual installments. What I found was that in most cases, these service contracts that they were selling you in addition are actually provided through the manufacturers themselves, and they're just double charging you for ultimately them coming to pick up your panel or your system, shipping it to the manufacturer who provides a loaner for them, and then replacing it under the manufacturer's warranty. We uncovered thousands of dollars in monthly and annual service contracts that were at best completely unnecessary and erroneous, and at worst were pretty much purposefully deceitful and misleading. So I would absolutely tell you that as you think about your cost of ownership and cost of investment, consider all the expenses you have with your x-ray setup and shop to see if there's better solutions. If somebody's telling you that there's only one option and it's going to cost you 35 or 40 grand, get another quote. Talk to Henry Schein, talk to Gil, talk to us, but get a couple quotes and do your homework. Just like if you were buying a car and there's 3 dealers in your market that sell the same car, compare them. See who offers the better services. See who seems less sleazy, honestly. So I would highly encourage you to do that from firsthand experience. So this last one's pretty straightforward, but I love showing this because we've already done nearly a dozen of these this year. Space is the biggest reason why, second largest reason I hear people say, I don't have x-ray in my office and I never can. It's space. If space is your issue or something like we don't have the right lead shielding, I highly encourage you look at a mobile x-ray option. This year alone, as I said, we've done a dozen of these, and it has much more lenient, if not any, lead shielding requirements. It's also excellent if you have a satellite office or a couple locations and you're not ready to have x-ray in all of them. You can do mobile with a panel and you can bring it around to multiple offices, and it will help you determine if the investment in more x-rays is worthwhile. So when you take a look at this, this is a good kind of way to see it. Most states require you to purchase a stand for inspections. It almost looks like a camcorder. It feels like a camcorder in terms of weight. It's highly portable, but for the state inspections, most require it to be affixed to a device. Now, Practically speaking, I see people use it not affixed all the time. But when you're purchasing it, I would say your consultant who's working with you will tell you your state's requirements because all 50 states have similar but different requirements. But when it's mounted on the stand, what's nice, it's easy to roll room to room. You'll see that same acrylic kind of plexiglass plate with a panel underneath it. The panel comes out then so you can do your lateral shots. Um, and it holds a great charge. It comes with batteries. It is an excellent way where if space is an option, you should definitely look at a mobile solution. It also has the ability to be paired with a laptop. So if you want to take it office to office, or you don't want to have one main PC tower somewhere that you feel like you have to go back to, it has a slot and a stand for a laptop. It's super easy to bring room to room. Finally, before I change gears to questions here, a lot of times we get asked questions on new clinic build outs or opening a first time practice. We have consultants and resources who can help with room drawings, physicist reports, clinic configuration. We have amazing financing options. We have a lot of options where you can defer payments 6 months, 8 months, 12 months. So don't feel like you're buying a car and you have to pay it all out of pocket up front. Just like I said, though, with looking at multiple car dealers or multiple X-ray dealers, don't be afraid to shop your finance quotes. I think it's a great way to make sure you are getting the best rate for your credit, your company's credit history. So that is definitely something we can assist with. So on that note, I'm going to take a breather here. I'm going to look at the Q&A, see if we have any. I see a doctor I know well. Dr. LaFontaine, great to see you. What's your opinion on portable X-ray units if your space is limited? I've been a huge fan. I will tell you, over my career, when portable first came out, my fear around portable was that it was a little gimmicky, and I wasn't sure if the quality was going to work. You know, it, it looks great on a booth. When you see Bill Nelson, one of our representatives at a trade show, you'll usually see him with one on the booth, and it looks cool. It looks like almost a old JVC camcorder. What I've come to find, having placed them over the last 6, 7 years, is they really work excellent. The quality of image is great. It pairs to the panel right away. It gives you a lot of versatility and flexibility. Now, you do have to be mindful, if you have a traditional X-ray setup and have the space for it, I do think that if you have the space for it, those can just be easier because it's a dedicated area. You're getting patients out of the room to that dedicated area. You're keeping your other rooms flowing more easily. Having said that, though, the portable works really well, and the feedback we get from users we've installed it with is excellent. We just put one with one of the major podiatry schools so they could bring it to their satellite clinic locations. Do you have to use the stand to take the X-ray? Practically speaking, Dr. Perry, and good to see you as well. No, I mean, you don't need to. I would say during the inspection, though, we'll always give you the guidance on what the state says. If the state is very clear on it needs to be affixed, you're going to want to get your state inspection done with it hooked up to the stand. You're going to want to have the stand. Practically speaking, though, I oftentimes see people using it free on its own, and it's it is incredibly lightweight. Okay, so what are your
There's one in
thoughts?
here. What are your thoughts? Yeah. What are your thoughts about C-arm instead of X-ray?
The arm is excellent technology. It's a phenomenal image. I think C-arms, whether you get a used mini C-arm or buy a new mini C-arm, it's great. I think the portable C-arm, which we sell the Turner Imaging one, is an excellent device, especially if you're treating athletes and you want to get an image on site at the location. Practically speaking, what I'd say I've seen over the years with people with C-arms, like back when surgical suites, when you were getting reimbursed for surgical suites in your office and able to bill out a lot more for doing in-office surgery, there was a much better financial use case for the cost of a C-arm. Generally speaking, a portable or a mini C-arm or a full C-arm, it's usually about 3 times the cost. So when you were getting those higher reimbursements, it was easier to pay that off faster. Most of that's kind of been cut away. I do tend to find people are getting C-arms less frequently just because they're large, they're bulky, they're harder to move around. But from an image quality standpoint, C-arm is a step above without a doubt. On the handheld, I see that question. Won't it blur the image? Surprisingly, no. And we can get on and kind of, for anybody who wants to see something like that over a remote demo, or if we're going to be at a show where you're going to be at, we can show you how it goes. It's surprisingly very easy, and you don't deal with blur images. Again, if you can fit the stand, though, I think the stand's easier and less liability, less likely to drop something. Practically speaking, though, you know, especially in highly rural locations where I see people going out to 4 satellite offices and they go to a different one every week, they don't want to travel with a stand or bring a stand everywhere. And they just bring the device and take their x-ray images, and it works great. But yeah, if you can have it hooked up to a stand, I'd never say no. Yeah, to your point, you can't really take the stand to the satellite. Correct. Yeah. And that's typically, I don't see people doing that. And I have doctors who take it to 5 different offices, and they give great feedback on image quality and on the results. Happy to also put you in touch with doctors if you ever want referrals, because why trust a rep? Talk to another doctor who has one, and we can always put you in touch with those. The panel size is 10 by 12. We also have panels though, 14 by 17. If you're doing mobile, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, 10 by 12 fits most feet sizes, but if it's ever a concern, 14 by 17 is definitely a safer, like you're never going to have a foot that doesn't fit on a 14 by 17. We do get some offices though who might be multi-specialty, and that I've even seen the mobile used for like chest x-ray, so they go with a larger panel size, and we have all the panel sizes. I'm
There's a
jumping.
couple questions in the chat about pricing. So
Yes.
basically, what are the prices? And then another one is very specific. Can I ask about numbers? The highest reimbursement I've seen for 73630 is 2556 through Blue Cross Blue Shield. How long to break even on your cheapest package?
Great question, and I'm going to see if I can share this sheet and it will work. Are we seeing this?
Yes.
This is something we can share with you. You can play with all the numbers based off yours. We usually say like the average Medicare reimbursement, call it $30, but if you want to plug in 25, this is really where you can plug in some of your own numbers of how many patients do I see a day who I think if I had the x-ray, I would be prescribing, or I would be working this into my plan of care. So if it's 5 patients a day, 5 days, call it 4 days a week on average, 80 patients a week, or sorry, my math's off, 20 patients a week, 80 patients a month. You could say, okay, 80 patients, this will update and auto calculate. So we'd be happy to share this with anybody. You can play with these codes, and then if you're financing it, you could factor in finance rates. If you're not financing it, it'll kind of give you an idea of what is my ROI, what does my payback period look like? And we can also do this in an Excel if this is not as advanced as you'd like it, but this tends to be useful. So costs, I just have, if you're getting a full system, everything from scratch, it might be in that 33K range. To the point of cost, though, if you're doing a retrofit, a lot of times a retrofit, depending on what you need, could be anywhere from 17 grand to 20 grand. But for round numbers, let's use 20 grand here because it's easier math. This will kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at from what's my monthly net income going to be? What's my payment going to be? And we can help you very quickly work backwards on what's your ROI. I do see a couple more questions in the chat. I'm still working on Yeller, as old Yeller's still working when she dies. There I go. Hey, There is no issue with that at all. What I would tell you though is with old Yellers, like a lot of times we do what I would call staged upgrades or like pieced upgrades. So, we might upgrade the base and upgrade to a digital panel with old Yeller, but still keep the tube head and the X-ray head in the box. And you ride that until it goes. And when it goes, then at that point you can upgrade those additional pieces or parts. Or you might decide, you want to go from single directional or unidirectional to bidirectional. But there's nothing wrong with that. I would just say ask your X-ray tech if you're not the one doing the X-rays, ask them if there's anything that's catching, anything that's falling, anything that's worrying them, because you might be surprised what they'll tell you, or go over and have them do one on you and see what could be a liability. Because I had one fall on my foot in an office, and I know it's happened to others as well. Costs on portable, when you're looking at like the portable unit itself, just the actual like the JVC camcorder looking piece, it's actually less than or very similar. Even with the stand, I'd say it's about the same as getting an Excel or a pod scan. I would ballpark that in that $12,500 range, because that's going to be ADA compliant. You can take 50% of that 10,450 maximum as a tax credit. So it kind of nets you out to a cost of around, call it $7,500. And that's, I'll say, without tax and shipping. The panels themselves, depending on the type of panel and the size panel you get, the actual panels themselves, though, those could range from, call it 15 to 17K up to 22K. So typically when I see somebody doing a complete portable package, a portable X-ray, and they need a panel, software, laptop, the stand, everything, usually it's coming in between 31 and 5 and $33,000, which again, it's not a small number, but if you think about it, it's the cost of a lower end car in today's market, and it's going to last you probably 6 times the length of it. And from a ROI standpoint, you're going to see it quickly. Biggest issues with portable. I'd say practically speaking, some of the biggest issues I see are it does require you to actually think, in that if somebody doesn't charge the batteries and it comes with two, you're going to go to shoot an X-ray that next day and the batteries are all dead and you got to wait and let it charge. That is a practical issue, but that's also a practical issue with the traditional X-rays, in that if you get a wireless, they come tethered or wireless for the traditional systems with a panel. What I would tell you is wireless, I always recommend, because over time we see the wired, they fray and they have connection issues, because honestly, people are just, they're moving them and they're rough with them. So you end up having like, uh, not as much mechanical as electrical issues sometimes with those. With wireless panels, which is mostly what we recommend, wireless panels, though, have the same thing as the portable X-ray, which is you got a battery on it and a battery charging. But when that battery is charging, you can't necessarily use the device at the same time. So you always have to have one in the cradle, one in use. And if somebody uses it all day and then they don't charge either of the batteries, the next day you're going to have a dead unit. That's the biggest issue I'd say with portable. The only other issue, and it's like anything, is if you're sloppy with it, if you don't keep it in a case, if you don't, you know, protect your investment, whether it's your laptop or your phone, and you drop it, things can break. And they used to, a lot of these companies used to sell drop insurance. It was excellent. A lot of the finance companies required it. There's no insurance carrier that will do drop insurance anymore. They've just decided that it was too tough to determine if it was intentional, unintentional, or not, and if people were trying to take advantage of it to get a quick cash out on a insurance policy. So they no longer have drop insurance. I see
All
some
right,
laughter.
going, yeah, going back to the Q&A, there's a couple questions here about ADA. So one is, with ADA, it can cost only 50%, and the other is, what qualifies for ADA? Is it just the lower base?
So with the ADA, again, I'm going to go back to the slide. And I'm going to encourage you. This is a link, and I'll drop it in the chat here in a second. But with this link, what I would say is on the ADA side, the way I've read it is there's a maximum expenditure of $10,250. 50% of eligible access expenditures in a year up to this maximum can be deducted as a tax credit. So if let's say you're spending 12,000 on the X-ray that is ADA qualified, or you might just be doing a base upgrade, which is qualified, so it could be half that. 50% up to that 10,000 amount is a tax credit. So if it's $12,000, you can get a tax credit of 5,125, which is half that 10,250 number. And that would be a tax credit. So it's not quite 50% of the purchase in that case, but it's about 44% of it if the math in my head is right. So that's fairly significant. To the question of what makes it ADA compliant, two parts to that. I'd say first and foremost, yes, base height. So the base height for ADA compliance needs to be 3.5 inches or lower. So these base on this newer one meet that. And it's really the base, not as much this piece, not as much the tube head or the actual X-ray head itself. Where it comes into play with the mobile piece, and if you look in the photos, it's actually two parts. Really, what makes this ADA compliant is that the patient doesn't need to, in theory, get on anything to just get a basic X-ray. But to get the digital X-ray, it comes with this acrylic base that's also under 3.5 inches. So to that question of what makes it ADA, I would say first and foremost, the base is definitely a part of it. But in the case of mobile, it in and of itself qualifies as an ADA. So if you were doing the mobile with this, you would deduct your 50% of the 10,250. Your credit would be off this entire purchase here, which still maxes you out at that 5,125. But if you were doing a traditional X-ray system upgrade, it's really the base component that gives you the ADA eligibility. How is cassette erased each time? I'm assuming we're talking portable here because DR technology no longer has a cassette. That is actually computer radiography or CR technology, a ScanX. And for photos, I'd point to this. This is kind of the cassette. There is no cassette in DR technology. Having said that, on here, if the question is how are the images stored, so the images actually, this takes the physical X-ray itself. The digital component is computed, well, not computed, it's digitally radiographed through the DR panel. It goes straight to your computer with the software. And the full image set is not stored on here. There will be some images, though. We recommend at the end of the day clearing it off. Even though it won't have patient name or anything in here, there'll be no HIPAA identifying factors. We still say clear it off, delete it at the end of the day. Another name I know, Dr. Alexopoulos. Thank you for asking that question. Must the C-arm have the ability to print the picture to be able to bill for the service? I do not know, and I will find that out and I will follow back up with you. That's a good question. And I haven't done C-arm as much recently in the last 5 years because, again, to that comment of since things really changed with in-office surgery centers and so forth in most states, I oftentimes get people who want C-arm quotes and very rarely get people who want to spend C-arm money. But I can absolutely get that answer and I will send it to you in the morning.
Awesome. Those are some really good questions. I was very impressed. Thank you guys for typing all those questions in and thinking of them and paying attention. Nick, where can we see SureFit out on the road?
We will be at both the Ohio OFAMA and Columbus next week. I will be there myself. We'll also be at the Georgia Podiatry meeting next week. We will be at the Western in June out in Anaheim, and we will be at the National in July in Dallas because everybody loves Dallas in July. And I say that as somebody who lived there for 6 years. So we will be out and about. But what I would say is if you're interested in just seeing options or getting feedback, don't hesitate to text. This is my cell phone. My phone is filled with photos of people's Excel, their old Yellers, or photos of their CR unit. You can certainly text photos. We can do remote walkthroughs of stuff. We can also get out in the field and, we can have some of our X-ray field technicians come visit if needed. So certainly come see us at a show, but don't feel like you have to wait for, the national or somewhere in the fall if this is a nagging problem you want to address now.
Awesome. I think you did a great job. I mean, this was some really, really good information and not a sales pitch. So I thank you for putting together such a great presentation, and I really appreciated all of your Cinco de Mayo references.
I'm missing the margarita, but I tried with the rest. Thank you all for joining
Well,
us.
mine's empty now, so I'm missing it too, but that's okay. All right, we have a couple more this month. We've got Nolaro on May 12th. They're talking about what exactly is a normal gait. And then we have Amex is back on, I think it's May 26th. They are going to talk about some of their products that are kind of revolutionizing the industry. So we'll look forward to those. Don't forget, you guys are all entered to win $100. And you're entered a second and third time if you attend the rest of our May webinar. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, SureFit, for taking the time. And thanks to all of you for hanging out with us on your Cinco de Mayo. All right,
Thank you,
we
Ann.
will see you all next time. Good night, everyone.